Hey babes, this is Tandem Orgasms, your go-to podcast on life coaching, owning your divine feminine power, and the far-out new age world of spirituality with your hosts, Caitlin Englert and Jen Morgan. Ladies, it's time to step into a new kind of confidence, one where you stop searching for and instead claim the balance you crave. Each week, we will bring you wisdom, personal experiences, and ridiculous banter that will have you laughing while also providing you with useful tools to transform your life from blah to turned on to your climactic inner diva.
Hey guys, welcome to episode 6 of Tandem Orgasms. I'm Caitlin Engler and this is
Jenn Morgan.
Today we wanted to take a few minutes, hopefully a few minutes, because we're trying to cut down on our time, but we seem to be getting longer each week. We want to talk about podcast problems. We keep it real on here.
Yeah.
We want to take some time to talk about anger and the emotion of anger. So a lot of times what we often hear is anger is a surface level emotion, and underneath there's always more. So it's almost like an iceberg, right? Like anger is the tip of the iceberg, but there's always more underneath. Mm-hmm. While that is somewhat true, I believe anger is a real emotion. And I think it's okay to just sometimes feel angry, and then that is it. There isn't always more attached to it.
Or a need to define it.
So what we want to talk about today is what is anger, and then give you some tools and some strategies to help navigate those triggers when you do feel really angry.
Mm-hmm. So, this kind of concept of this iceberg, I think, like you said, that can be the case. It doesn't necessarily always have to be the case. But I will say that it's funny that you said this iceberg thing, because I actually wrote in my notes something the other day about my personal emotions, realizing that I'm so easy to feel anger or frustration versus any other emotion. And so it was funny that you say, oh, like this iceberg theory, because I actually wrote this the other day for myself. I was like, why is it that every time I feel triggered, I feel anger and I feel frustration, and I feel that that's okay, instead of feeling the sadness or the hurt or the pain or whatever is underneath that, I suppose. It's like, I don't want to go into that place. So I'd rather just be angry and I'd rather just be frustrated. But I was trying to think to myself, where did this come from? Why is it that it's okay for me why would I rather just feel angry and pissed than feel sad? Right. And so I realized for me that, and actually I was thinking it's not necessarily just for me, but when I was processing, like, holy crap, as a society, we have given permission to the feeling of anger and frustration. And we don't necessarily really want to look at, sadness or pain or, whatever else it is. So I'm like, wow, this is like a really profound thing that I just realized for myself. I'm like, I'd rather feel anger and frustration, and holy crap, that was accepted. Like, I actually realized as a child that was accepted. It was not accepted for me necessarily to feel sad or lonely or in pain or, whatever those other feelings were, because I think that maybe nobody knew what to do with me if I felt those things. So I realized just the other day I was being triggered, and I'm like, oh, wow, I'm so angry right now. But I wasn't angry. I was really sad. But I was like giving myself, it's a learned behavior now. I'm like, I'm okay if I'm angry. I'd rather just be angry. I can deal with angry. Like, I don't know. It kind of was something that sat with me. And I thought to myself, why is it that I don't give myself permission for the other things? Right? So you're saying you learn to give yourself permission to feel just anger. I have only given myself permission to feel anger and nothing else.
I find that some of my triggers around anger come back to sensory things in my environment. And so, especially with parenting, like the kids their noises and the screaming and the crying. Like I get very easily triggered by that.
Which
and it can come out
an empath thing. So if you did not check out our last episode, please check that out now, because that is a very, very normal empath quality, is to be very triggered by noise, sensory issues of that nature. So continue on that, because that's great.
Yeah. And so I've known this for a while, and it's hard once I feel triggered to control my reaction. And so I was listening to a podcast the other day, and she was saying things like I already know, right? How when you are triggered by something, you go into a fight, flight, or freeze mode, and it's in your brain. It's the nervous system, right? The nervous system. And so there's something that happened, a trauma or something that has happened in your life that has caused that reaction. And so like, I might not know yet why I'm reacting that way, but I do know I am, that I do go into fight or flight. Like I either react to the kids or I run and hide from the kids.
Yeah.
And so identify, I've heard this being a social worker, it's something I've talked a lot about with clients, but also I've heard in books and in school and podcasts and all over the place. But the way that she said it felt very validating to me, like that it is out of my control, that I am getting triggered, but I can control my reaction to the trigger.
Yeah.
But I need to start identifying it and acknowledging it and giving myself that permission that this is what's happening right now.
Yeah. And permission is huge for emotions and feelings. It's like, I just think it's very fascinating that we will give ourselves permission to feel one thing or not another thing, like it's right or wrong. Like, how are you right or wrong for having a certain feeling? Like, okay, like for me, it's like, okay, well, if you're feeling sad or depressed or lonely or in pain or down on yourself, that's wrong. And so it's like, what? Anger is fine.
Well, it's the emotion isn't wrong, but it's the behaviors that come with our emotions that can result in harmful situations.
Yeah.
Or right and wrong situations.
I think for me, it's actually the emotion itself that I was like, well, I don't, this is unfavorable, undesirable. And for me, it was because when I did feel those things, so that permission for me actually comes from what other people's responses were to my emotion throughout my lifetime. And so that was an additional trigger, right, for me. So it's like, I'm triggered by something, and then I'm triggered by the potential reaction somebody would have or will have if I feel any of these unfavorable things, which have notoriously gotten me a pretty poor outcome, which would be being sad, being lonely, being, I don't know, down on myself, being depressed, being frustrated. Frustrated, I can go kind of either way. Is a little bit, it kind of is a little bit of both. But, it's like I wasn't given the permission when I did feel those things. I was often invalidated. And so I have now attached my own permission to it. Like, it's okay if you feel angry, because people can handle that. People can't handle sad, depressed, because they don't know what to do with you. Right. So it's like this you have societal permission to those feelings. You have what your learned experiences have been. And then you might attach your own meaning to that too. And I'm like, anger is good.
I think a lot of times anger comes from our expectations.
Yeah.
So expectations of what we had of other people or of ourselves. But if you had this expectation of a family member to act a certain way or to take care of something for you, or they were going to handle a situation and they didn't do it, or they didn't do it the way you wanted them to do it, then that results in feelings of anger. Or my kids don't, do what I ask them to do, I get angry, I get upset. And so,
so you have somebody seeing that
it's expectations.
Okay. Yeah.
And then I get angry with myself because of my reaction. Yeah, because I had these expectations that I should have handled it a certain way and I didn't.
And your anger is exponentially growing.
Yes.
where do you go from that?
I feel like that movie, that guy in the movie Inside Out, the anger, the emotion. Yeah. I feel like that sometimes, like I get so reactive. Like I feel like my top of my head is just blowing off.
So yeah, if you haven't seen that movie,
you need to watch it.
It's a really good kids movie, but it's like literally it's like the anger gets anger, and
he's easily triggered.
Like everything in his eyes is like I don't even know how to say it, like a problem.
Yes.
It's like everything's a problem, everything's a trigger. Like we should react to this. Shouldn't we react to this? You know? And so you're kind of just, I don't know where I'm going with that.
Yeah, I feel, well, it's funny because I was saying,
cut that out.
Maybe it was to you the other day. I was saying, like, I feel like I'm two people sometimes. Like I'm this coach and this therapist, and I talk to people and I give them coping skills. And then I get off the Zoom call and then it's like, I'm a totally different, like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Like I switch people. Like I'm this one person here with my clients and in my job and with adults. But then I'm a different person when it comes to parenting. Yeah. And then I get upset and I feel guilty and shameful and angry with myself because I don't like those reactions.
Yeah. And so I'm going to piggyback off that because my own experience is not necessarily, I would say, in the parenting wrong, but I have felt that way too, where, okay, like I have very high level of mindfulness, right? I have, I help people work through their triggers, work through their patterns, which are most likely deeper than just surface level situations. But then every once in a while, for me, it gets to a place where I'll be so triggered, like it's like trigger. And it's like, oh my God, how did I get here? I'm not where I'm supposed to be. And I judge it. But here's what I've realized is that no matter how much work you do, I'm going to say that again, no matter how much work you do, okay, ego is still a factor. You are a human. Therefore, you have an ego. And you will have moments that are shorter or longer where you slip back into ego. So regardless of your information that you have, regardless of how knowledgeable and how much study you've done, regardless of how much self-work you've done, you will at some point slip back into ego, which means that you have the potential to be triggered even on old things that you've worked on. It means you might slip into an unfavorable or undesirable emotion. But stop for a minute and just say, I am human. I don't need to judge this. I don't need to say, oh my God, I thought I was so much farther along and I'm just not. It's the fact that you're a human and your ego is just popping up. It's how quick you actually shift back to your center. That actually is the telltale sign of how far you've come. How quick can you shift back, right? Not that you went into ego, not that you got triggered, not that you got angry, but how quick do you come back to your center and pivot, right? And when I realized this, I was like, I will say this was a recent kind of aha moment for me because I was triggered by something and it brought me back to a old place. Like when I say old, I'm saying like this is teenage years, 20-year-old Jenn, and she didn't know what the fuck she was doing in her life. But she was triggered as hell all the time. And I was like, oh my God, how did I was almost like it was like I was a observer. And I was watching what my mindset was doing and how deep I went, how quick. Right. I was like trigger. And I went down the rabbit trail and it was really dark, really quick. And I was like, holy shit. Do you really think this? But I was observing it the whole time and saying to myself, like, oh my God, if I'm thinking this, I must not be as far along as I think I am. And then I was like, wait, actually I am, because I'm observing this and I'm saying, and I'm saying, wow, that's a lot. Right. And I wanted to judge that so bad. And I kind of let myself do that for a day. I judged it. I was like, oh wow, And then when I stopped judging it, and I realized just because I've done this work and I'm aware of these things doesn't mean that they won't come up from time to time. But how quickly can I pivot when they do? I actually let myself go in there and really kind of sit in that for a little while to realize I have complete control here. I've actually gone through all of these triggers. I've actually gone through all of these wounds, which also, by the way, surfaced in anger first and then went way deeper. And I was like, I don't even know how to tell anybody about this because it's like going to come out like spewage, total vomit, right? But I let myself sit in that long enough to realize that I still actually had control of my mindset, because I was observing it the whole time. Like, what is this? What is this? Is this what you want? Is this what you want to do? Like, you know where this stuff's come from, right? I knew every situation that I was attaching this, like old things that I was attaching it to. And I was like, oh, I actually do have, like, it's not like I'm far back. It's not like I've backslid. It's just that I just got triggered by something, and now I can pivot and say, wow, I was an ego for like a day there. And holy crap, now I can work on that. Super cool.
And I was going to say something similar, a way that I've learned over the years to check in with myself. When I feel myself getting angry, I say, is this worth it? Is this worth getting mad at the Starbucks barista because she got my coffee wrong?
Does that happen to you a lot?
No, actually, but that's the first example that came to my mind.
I just want to bring us back, like, not talking about backsliding or anything, but I feel like in our first episode, you said that you were mad at the baristas because they didn't get it right a lot. I think that you might have some unsurfaced things to be talk about.
At other coffee shops, because they don't make it like Starbucks. But every once in a while, either Starbucks takes too long in the line, and that makes me angry, or they get it wrong, and then I drive off, and I don't have time to go back to get the right one. Clearly, I still have anger to work through.
Often the Starbucks that triggers.
So what I do, my process is I typically will let myself just escalate for a few minutes, and then I check in with myself and say, is this really worth it? Is this worth the anger? And in most situations, the answer is no. There are a few situations that, yes, I'm allowed to feel angry about this situation. A quick example, when I first started my career, I actually was promoted to a primary therapist, never trained, just kind of thrown into the position like fresh out of college, like 6 months out of college. And they were just like, okay, you're good. Like, you've done an internship. Here you go. And no one trained me. And so I felt very lost during that time, but I kind of was just taken out of the blue one day. They sat me down and they basically told me, like, I'm never going to be anything. I'm an awful therapist. I don't know what I'm doing. And so it was obviously devastating to me because it made all my fears come true, things I already thought about myself, but it made me really angry. And so, like, in that situation, I'm allowed to feel angry because it was like an injustice, and what they were saying was not true. And if there was truth in it, there was obviously a better way of saying it. So I do think there are some situations where anger is warranted. But in most, 90% of the situations, when I ask myself, is this really worth the anger? And is the anger going to get me the resolution that I want?
What I'm looking for.
And what I'm looking for, no, it's typically not. And what it does, it just ruins my day. It takes me out of a space that I want to be in. Like, I want to be in a good space, and anger takes me out of that.
Yeah.
It takes, away from my kids. It takes away from my clients. It takes away from my relationships with people. It takes away from myself.
Yeah.
And so
it steals time.
It does steal time.
And steals present moment, right? So, like, anger, again, if you feel angered, I like to use this analogy a lot. It's about trying on a coat, right? If you need to feel angry, try on the coat and decide for yourself, does this coat actually fit me? And 9 times out of 10, like for me, right? Anger might not be, for me, oftentimes anger is not the actual feeling. So I try on the coat and I say, okay, am I actually angry? I don't know. I don't like this coat. It's actually sadness, right? I try on sadness and I'm like, oh, wow, yeah, I'm actually sad. And I'm going to leave that coat on for a while. I don't have to keep it on, right? Because eventually that's just going to steal my time away from my present moment, which is where I am in collaboration with my life, which means I get the choice of how I want to feel and what I want to create. And so 9 times out of 10, those emotions, although we want to always respect the process of the emotion because it is telling us something about our world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And say, I'm going to give it its time. I'm going to let it have its life cycle, but then I'm going to take it off because really, like,
I don't need it on. It's hot.
I don't need it. Yeah,
it's hot. I'm going to take the coat off.
I don't need a coat today.
The weather's changing. It's hot.
I don't even need a coat today. It's fine. But I think, giving yourself the permission to feel what it is that you actually feel, if it's not anger, but if you feel anger, giving yourself permission to feel that too.
I also notice a lot of times when I'm easily triggered or I'm feeling angry often, it's because I'm not giving myself that space to process situations that I'm in, or I'm minimizing the weight that those situations are carrying in my life. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you're basically saying like, well, this isn't worth like this. Like,
yeah, I'm like, oh, that's not that big of a situation.
Yeah.
But really, it is holding a lot of weight in my life. I'm still carrying a lot of emotion and thought around whatever that situation is.
Yeah.
And so I think back, or going back to our last episode, we talked about empaths. Mm-hmm. And I talked about the process that I went through last year. And I remember when I got to that place of paralysis and I didn't really know what way to go, I do remember anger coming up for me. Mm-hmm. And this feeling of just wanting to crawl out of my own skin because it was just so many emotions. But looking back, the reason why I think I felt so angry is because I wasn't giving myself that space to process things. And I went right back into what I was doing, or I was burning myself out with just life in general. Mm-hmm. And I didn't give myself breaks. I didn't give myself acknowledgement. I didn't feel like I could. I felt like that's just what you do. You soldier on. You get over it. This is life. You just do it. You pull yourself up by the bootstraps. And so
I think we're often told that from a very young age, like, just get it together. Come on.
And so if you're feeling emotionally overwhelmed, whether that's with family situations, just with your own changes you're going through, with work, with children, whatever it is in your life, it's, you let that build and build and build, and you're not giving yourself permission to rest and recover mentally, physically, emotionally. Then what happens is anger comes in. You start getting angry at yourself. You get angry at those around you. Like resentment builds. Like, just leave me alone. Everyone just leave me alone, because it becomes too much. But what if you, again, set boundaries and said, like, I'm going to take this day off this week. I'm sending my kids to daycare, or I'm going to take off work, or I'm going to do this. And I'm going to give myself some time to do me, whatever that might look like. So most of the time for me, it's just either moving at a slower pace that day or dancing.
Yeah. So what if when you feel angry, instead of trying to invalidate that and say like, well, I shouldn't be this way, or trying to mask all the other emotions as anger, you say to yourself, am I feeling angry because there's something I'm not doing for myself that I need? Like, did I miss a mark? Did I miss a mark here somewhere? Was there something that, like, my body was asking for me, my mind was asking for me, my soul was asking for me, that, like, I just wasn't listening? And if that is yes, and I'm feeling angry because I missed an opportunity here to do something that was going to serve me, that I needed to do to serve myself as a human being, what can I do now? Right? Can I take the time to empty that out? Right? Like, you burned out. Really. And I think people burn out a lot because they miss those markers to say, hey, you know what? I'm feeling pretty tired. Right? Because that's another thing that I think is either socially acceptable or not socially acceptable, or acceptable in a relationship or not acceptable in a relationship, or acceptable when you're a kid or not acceptable when you're a kid. Like, rest time.
Well, and so yesterday I have a women's meeting that I attend on Saturday mornings. And so this topic came up about anger and angry teenagers. And so it made me, think back to when I was a child. I remember having a lot of anger as a child, like so very angry. Irrational, like
I was an angry teen.
Like there wouldn't be like the right food in the house, and I would like kick a hole in the wall over it.
Really?
Yeah, I know. That surprised you?
Kind of.
Yeah.
But like in a way,
but like we always had food in our house. So like, what was I angry about? I don't know. Or like I was very aggressive towards my sister. And, it's hard to acknowledge that I was like that, but I do reflect back and think like, what were you so angry about? And there was a point when I was a teenager that I was just like angry at my dad. Can't even tell you why. I just was. Stopped talking to him for a few years. He never did anything wrong. I just was angry because I wanted to be. And so I, said on the meeting yesterday, I still can't tell you to this day what that anger is. But what I can tell you is through the step work in my recovery program and writing my book, like really writing out in detail some of these stories throughout my childhood and throughout my addiction, writing them in the depth that I had to write them in was intense. Like I would have to write a little and stop, write a little and stop.
Because of the anger was surfacing?
No, it wasn't anger though. It was emotion.
So it was
different emotion.
It was
like
the iceberg.
It was like this awful feeling in like my gut and like a sadness. And yes, it was the underneath the iceberg.
So you were, as a teenager, it was the food, it was the whatever, and you were angered, but you were actually masking. And that's probably right, because we will suppress all those other feelings. So it's like you needed to go through a process of taking survey of your entire life and saying, here were the benchmarks. And I remember feeling angry here, but like, why? Why was I actually, and it was all the other things that were below the surface.
But I didn't even know that though writing about those things was going to help me release the anger. I just started writing because I had to for the book. And they were like memories that were coming up for me. But, memories are because we have emotions attached
to it.
So a lot of my memories are happy, but a lot of them are because of situations I was angry in.
It's probably, I think for most people, actually easier to go back and remember all of the things that happened that were triggering or trauma based for us than it is to like remember like some of those moments that were like really, really amazing. Like in those, like just for like an example, like, I will remember, like, it could be even the same day where like I'll have like an occurrence and it'll be like, for some reason I'm remembering the anger or something that threw me for a loop versus like the thing like that happened 5 seconds before it that was like actually magical and like amazing. And so and the case is because, again, like you said, we're attaching an emotion to that experience, and that means that most likely that emotion did not get its time to process out. So an actionable tool that you guys can take to start to work through, if you just find that you're getting angry, it could be all these old triggers from these old experiences where you allowed yourself to feel anger, but not sadness, blah, 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 whatever it is. So what if you take a moment and you just free write through? I always do like an A/B. Like I remember A is my first experience and B here is my last experience, and I'll just go. And sometimes I start from the bottom and sometimes I start from the top. It just depends on what I'm feeling that day. But I can remember my first experience of anger. Most people, I think, if you really think about it, you just close your eyes. It'll come to you pretty quick. And your last one, you're like, well, that's kind of still fresh in my mind. And so it's not that you need to remember everything in between, but when you start free writing, those things will come out. And then you can say, and you can really look at it and say, okay, I was angered, but like, whoa, I was actually all of these things. And all of these things are why, because I didn't process any of that. That's the reason why it stuck. And
if you're not ready quite yet for that exercise, that's a great exercise. If you're feeling like that might be a little too much at first, like a really simple way to start is just doing some meditation or a visual meditation or some mindfulness action. So mindfulness is just bringing yourself back to the present moment. And so, if my kid is screaming, but I'm cooking dinner, maybe turning the stove off for a second or the oven off for a second to switch gears, to focus on this present moment and help put out this fire right here, and then switch back to what I'm doing.
It's a pivot.
It's a pivot. Yeah.
A pivot.
I like that word. It's a pivot. Because a lot of times we get stuck in what we're doing or we're focused on the future. And that's why when like a wrench is thrown in there, we become angry because we can't pivot or we don't know how to pivot. So if we just bring some mindfulness into why we're feeling that emotion in that moment, or just pivot to the situation in front of us, it can remove a lot of those triggers or some of that anger.
It's like the quote, I think the quote's something like about living in the future or living in the past. Like if you're trying to live in the future or you're trying to like live in the past, you can't live there. Right? It's something like that.
You can only live here.
Yeah, you can only really be in the present moment. If you're in the future or you're in the past, like you're kind of missing it. And so it is to pivot back to that. But it's not to say that all of those experiences that are potentially creating patterns of triggers within you should not be looked at, because there's probably a lot of information for you in those moments.
Okay, so I have a question for you.
Okay.
Because this whole time we've been talking about anger, and your tattoo is sticking her tongue out at me with flames around her head. And I just feel like she's speaking to me. Is this like your inner anger right here?
So this is, well, it's more than inner anger. It's a few layers deep, as I am.
Okay.
You know, as I am. But it is about my own experience with working through trauma in my life, and working through anger, and working through triggers, so that I can come to a place of love and acceptance with my world, with the people in my world, and myself. And so if you know anything about Kali, they can't really see, you know,
right.
the people.
Right. You have to explain it to them.
The people of the world.
Explain the tat.
Yes. So this is a Kali tattoo, and Kali is, she is a goddess of basically life and death, of rebirth and destruction. And so she destroys the ego, and she also helps destroy the ego of her counterpart Shiva, so that he can see from a place of love. So she is the goddess of destroying things that prevent from love, that prevent from the cycle, because we are always in a cycle of death and rebirth, and facilitating rebirth for the soul, for the world, for everything. So it's a lot of things, I guess, if I was to say.
It feels like fire.
Well, she is.
Like, I mean, she is hot and fiery.
Kali is known as a goddess that does have a lot of really intense feminine energy of anger, of that. Like, she is like, I am going to tear the world down, but only from the most loving place to recreate. So it's like looking at your demons, looking at the things that are trying to steal you from your moment, to steal you from your experience, looking at the pain and the experiences as a human that we all have, that are massive amounts of pain and trauma and feeling, and then saying, what can I create from this place? How can I serve from this place? And how can I love better from this place? So it's like, I'm not separating from those feelings that I felt. I'm not separating from those emotions that I've lived through, those experiences that I've lived through, the things that people have done to me, the things that I've done to people. I'm owning it all so that I can be reborn as a soul. That's a lot. But that's what that's
maybe we'll
about.
take a picture and put it on Instagram for you guys to see.
Yeah, it's
pretty awesome.
Yeah.
But I just had to mention it because the whole time we were talking about anger, and I felt like she was staring at me, like that she needed to be discussed.
Yes.
In this podcast.
And she is like, you know, many people do see Kali and she is intimidating, and she is scary. She wears skulls around her neck, or when she is pictured, she has severed heads in her arms, like many of them. And so she is seen as like this fierce, you know, destroyer, but she is also the recreator. And so that does come with being able to look at that anger. Like, she has anger. She looks menacing. There's a reason for that, but the beauty comes out of that place. And the love and the next level of the soul comes from that place. It's my shadow work. It's me having gone through all of my shadow work to reclaim who I am and say, no, this is who I am. And all of those pains and all of those traumas are for me to serve better and to show up in this world in the most authentic way and change the world. You know, if I have to burn it down, I fucking will.
Yeah, I think we're doing that. We're doing that on this podcast. We're burning it down and we're going to rebuild.
Like, what is that song? Burn it. It's a country song.
Or burn, baby, burn. So, burn, baby, burn.
Holly on roller skates. Just go and burn out. And it's like funk and you're like, woo.
I just had that visual. That was great.
And
like at Horizon Fun Effects.
Where the fun effects? They don't know that.
No, they don't know that unless you live in Rochester. It's an indoor skating arena.
I think we should go
with
there.
Disco lights, and it's pretty awesome.
We should go there and make.
Do they still have it?
I hope so.
That would be magical. I don't even know if I can rollerblade anymore.
I want to be that girl in like the bell bottoms, like roller skates backwards.
Wait, I saw someone rollerblading on the pole.
I did too. I saw that.
Like that needs to be in my life.
What I had seen was
this girl rollerblading around the pole, and I said I need to get with that.
Can we get rollerblades?
My accents, like, they don't even make sense. Why do they come out of my mouth? Oh, okay. So we did great on time. Let's just talk about that. We're amazing. Acknowledgement and awareness. We did great on time. I think we kept it under like 35 minutes or so.
5, 6.
And we're counting up. We're not doing so great anymore.
We're not centering and we're not grounded. And we're counting and we're counting.
Oh, all right, guys. Well, we appreciate the love. If you like today's episode, please share it with your friends and family on social media. And if there's any topics that you want to hear more about, please share with us on Instagram or Facebook.
And don't get mad, get glad. Heavyweight trash bags. It came in my head and I had to do it.
Yes, don't get mad, get glad. I like it.
Okay.
And we're ending on that note. See you next week.
Goodbye.
For more information on this episode, check out the show notes. Don't forget to follow us at Jen_Morgan and Caitlin.englert.coaching for updates. If you love this episode, take a screenshot and share to your Instagram stories. And don't forget to tag us. Until next time, have fun and don't forget to pleasure yourself.